Hey media, the last couple of days we've been looking at news bias and how reporting and organization and even images can affect how we understand the news. Now, of course, we hope that our news sources are being objective or avoiding bias, but we know that the news is written by people, people have opinions, and so bias often seeps into news. Last week, we compared a couple different news articles of the same event to try and find those different types of bias and identify the differences between the articles. And that's essentially what you'll be doing now for your final project for news. Go ahead and hop on Schoology and click in this news folder. And we'll be taking a look at the news essay. Let's start with the task sheet today, and we'll just be finding our articles. Now, the purpose of this, again, is to identify different types of bias in reporting. So your job is to choose a recent news event, something that's happened within the last 2 months, and find 3 different reports, 3 different tellings of the exact same event, just like we did with those President Trump articles last week about his first salary check. So that was all the same event, but written by 3 different reporters working for 3 different news sources. Now, when you're considering a news event, of course, if you think about what's going on in the news lately, it's coronavirus, right? But coronavirus is way too broad of a news event. You'll have to narrow it down. Maybe you could just use a press conference that President Trump spoke at. Maybe you could figure out another way to narrow it down if the state of Minnesota or if the country, if something else has happened to close down borders, something like that, that would be a news event that has to do with coronavirus. But just saying coronavirus, that's way too broad. So you certainly don't need to write about coronavirus. I just know that's what's been in the news. So when you're finding your news story, I want you to consider these 4 different categories, and I want you to find your news story from 3 of the 4 categories. Our first category over here on the left would be print sources. Now, these originally are in print, right? You can actually get a print copy of Star Tribune, Pioneer Press here in Minnesota, but of course, you'll be accessing them online. The second one, TV news. These would be television channels like NBC or ABC. They play news in the morning and in the evening, but usually during the day, they play entertainment programming, they play sitcoms, they play game shows, they play soap operas. So a station like Fox 9, well, they play news at night, but they play other things during the day. Now, the difference here, news only, this would be a channel like Fox News or CNN. They play all news all the time, right? There are no episodes of Big Bang Theory or The Price is Right on these news only networks. All news all the time. Our last category would be a web blog, and that's just an online or a digital format, so kind of the modern version of our print sources. To get started, I would choose any of these news categories. I'll just begin with BBC. That's a news-only network. It's a British news company. Go to their website. And on a news website, you can often see the different categories up here at the top. So you can choose something that you are interested in, or you can just scroll through until you find a story that interests you. I'll use this one on Amazon workers. So this one interests me. Once you find an article that interests you, you can see it's a couple paragraphs long. What I would do is highlight the title, and here's a quick trick for you. Paste it into Google, and then right here next to the Images tab, there's a News tab. And you'll see the exact same story or the exact same event, generally, from different news sources. Now, it's not always accurate, so you'd have to actually read the article. This one looks like it threatens national strike. So USA Today would be a print source. I'm not sure what some of these sources are. Motley Fool, I don't know. That might be an online-only news source. CNN would be news only. Now I'm using BBC, and that is already news only, so I'd probably skip over that one. Here's New York Times. This is a print source. Daily Beast, I can't remember what Daily Beast is. If you don't remember or you don't know what type of news source it is, just type it in and look it up on Wikipedia. All right. If I typed in New York Times and looked it up on Wikipedia, it would tell me this is a print news source that comes out in newspaper version. Again, be sure that you might actually have to click on the article. Um, I have the word virus in here, so really any news story with the word virus might be picked up. But that's a good way to find your 3 sources. So to begin, just choose any category. Anyone will do. And start there, find a story that you're interested in, and then plug it into Google and use that news tab to scroll through and find some different categories. A couple of tips to you as you are finding your articles. First of all, avoid what are called evergreen stories. An evergreen story is a story that they squeeze in usually at the end of a TV news broadcast, and it's something really bright and sunny and makes us feel better about the world after we've heard about war and murder and disease. But sometimes it's such a busy news day, they can't get to this story. And that's why it's called an evergreen story, because it's still good the next day. Just like an evergreen tree, it's not going to go bad, right? It's not going to die. So if we need to push that story to another day, not a big deal. You won't find a lot of bias in those stories because they're just happy pick-me-up type of stories. I'll show you an example of one that I found the other day. We've seen this news story. There was a dog who sprained his tail due to excessive wagging. He was so happy that his owners were home for quarantine, that he sprained his tail. And you can go watch a sad little video of little Rolo, the 7-year-old dachshund with his sprained tail. I think he's recovering well. But this is an evergreen story. It's very short. You're not going to find a lot of bias in a story like this. There aren't different opinions or different people who would have been interviewed. So that's just kind of a happy pick-me-up kind of evergreen story. The other type of story you'd want to avoid is just a sporting event. Sporting events or reports of sporting events often just feature the score and who scored the goal or who earned themselves a penalty. Again, there won't be a lot of bias unless something else happened at that sporting event aside from the game. If there was some type of protest, yeah, then that would work. But if it's just the sporting event and the score, you're not going to find much bias, just the facts. Secondly, I would avoid Associated Press stories. Associated Press is a company that kind of farms their stories out to other news sources, makes it cheap for other news sources to report. So I could send a reporter to China to better understand coronavirus, or I could just buy a story from the Associated Press, and that saves me a lot of money. So a lot of news stations, CNN, Fox News, NBC, ABC, CBS, all of these use Associated Press stories. And you'll know that it's by the Associated Press. Let's see if this one is. Because it will literally say by, no, this one's not. It will say by Associated Press. All right, or by this person with the Associated Press. So you can use one of those, but don't use more than one because they will literally be the exact same article. And again, we're contrasting, we're trying to find differences. So if you find the same article on Star Tribune, NBC, and BBC, well, that's not going to help you out. It will be impossible to spot the differences. Finally, I know you're going to be tempted to find short articles because it's easier and faster to read them, but I promise you it will be more difficult in the long run. I've had students do this before. They found a short article, 1 paragraph long. They said, all right, I'm done. And then when it came time to actually look for the different forms of bias, it was really difficult to do. Now, my articles, think back last week, those Trump articles were pretty short. 2 of them were half a page, and then 1 of them was 1 page. So that's not that bad. But there are some news stories that are only 1 paragraph long. Again, you're making your job harder in the long run. Avoid that. All right, now once you've got your topic picked out, you can go back to this news essay folder and click on News Essay Topic Sign Up. It'll bring you to a Google Doc that looks like this. You can type in your name, your news story, and then your 3 sources. Again, I have 4 different categories. You only need to choose 3 of those 4 categories. Now you notice, drum roll please, I wrote name or names. You have the option of working with a partner for this project. Now be wise. If you choose to work with a partner, You'll want to be sure that you both have the same level of ability and responsibility. So it's perfectly fine if you're friends, but if you are an A student and your friend is a D student, it's probably not wise for you two to work together. Your friend probably struggles with deadlines, so keep being their friend. That's important, but you shouldn't work with them here. You can go ahead and type in your partnerships. If I see a partnership that I don't think will work particularly well because I know your grades and how often you turn things in on time, or if you turn things in, I might contact you and your partner and say, I veto this partnership. You cannot work together. You'll be working alone. So you can either make the option, or you can choose the option to work alone. You can sign up with a partner, but just be aware that I might split you and your partner up if I don't think that you'll make a good match. The requirements for a partner for this project aren't any different. You just will have to communicate more, and you might have to do less writing because you and your partner will share that responsibility. I want only 2 people or partners, I suppose, per news story per class. So again, coronavirus is way too broad. If that's your news story, you have to tell me specifically what's going on with coronavirus so that we can get some different topics. And then here you can see my sources. My first one is CNN, and that is a news-only source, all news all the time. Washington Post is a print source. It's actually a newspaper that you could subscribe to. Obviously, I found the link online. And then ABC, that one is TV news. They play entertainment programs during the day, news in the morning and at night. So the one that I didn't use a web blog, which is the internet only news web blog there, category 4. Now to make these nice, beautiful links, you find your news story. Again, here's not a great example of a news story to use, but you grab your URL. And then you can paste it. And that one, remember, looks pretty ugly, but when you click on it once, you see this little pencil. Click the pencil, and now I can type in Fox News. Fox News is a news-only source. If this said Fox 9 up at the top, that would be local. There are a lot of local Fox channels, so be sure that you know the difference between TV news like ABC and Fox News and news only like CNN or Fox News. All right. Now, my last piece of advice to you, once you've decided if you're working alone or with a partner, you have your news story, your news event, and you have your 3 different sources from 3 of these 4 different categories. My recommendation is that you go to the site and copy and paste the article into a Google Doc. Here's why. Some news sources will only allow you to access that website a certain number of times before they ask you to pay for a subscription. So I really don't want you coming to me next week saying, Ms. Bierbaum, I can't access my article anymore. I believe Washington Post actually is one that you can only access a certain number of times per month before you need to pay for a subscription. So it's free for now, but it might not be later. So I'd go ahead and just highlight everything that's happening in this article, paste it onto a Google Doc, and then you have access to that Google Doc. Be sure that you include the title of the article, any images that you can, because that will help you to identify where you got which article from later. A lot of them, like CNN and ABC, you can access all the time. It's usually just the category 1 print sources that only allow you to access a certain number of times. So just be careful with those so that you don't lose access.